It's crown jewel of China's armed force, a laser-equipped missile-firing network-linked war machine said to rival the best tanks in the world. But here's the catch. Nobody knows if it actually works. The Type 99 is China's boldest attempt yet at matching Western main battle tanks like the M1 Abrams, and on paper, it's fast, it's lethal, and it's packed with modern tech. In reality, it's never fired a single shot in anger, and that does leave a really big question mark, doesn't it? So today we're going to break down what this tank is, why the Chinese military is putting oh so much faith in it, and whether that's faith justified, because if a war hinges on steel and on sensors, the answer might lie inside a 55-ton machine that's still waiting for its first real test. Now, China's journey to a third-generation main battle tank, i.e. one with composite armor, computer-stabilized fire control systems, and a usually smoothbore gun with a caliber around the 120mm kind of mark, was a long one, marked by lots of baby steps, foreign inspiration, and a few shots in the dark. Today's video is brought to you by Incogni. Look, here's the thing, your personal information is everywhere. Which isn't a good thing. There's data broker sites, people's search engines, even random business databases. Anyone with Google, which is everyone, could Google your name and pull up your phone number, your address, maybe even details about your family. Pretty scary stuff. And that's not just the risk of annoying spam, which already is annoying as shit. It's real risk for scams or even identity theft. And that's where Incogni comes in. Their custom removals feature is now at the core of their service. Here's how this thing works. You find a site exposing your info like White Pages, Trellis, or Unicourt, paste the link into Incogni and their privacy team get to work removing it. And they'll keep following up. They will keep hassling them so that your data doesn't pop back up online. And even better, Incogni's removal process has been independently verified by Deloitte. It's a big company to say that that's good. Well done, guys. So you know it's legit. Indeed you do. A friend from university went to work for Deloitte. It's a big company. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Use the code MEGAPROJECTS at incogni.com/megaprojects to get 60% off an annual plan. That's code MEGAPROJECTS at incogni.com/megaprojects for 60% off an annual plan. Now back to today's video. Where it all began back in the 1960s, when the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, that's China's armed forces, mostly used antiquated Type 59s, basically Chinese-built copies of the Soviet T-54 series. They were handy enough in a no-frills kind of way, but were hopelessly outclassed by the new generation of Western and Soviet tanks that had emerged by that time. Think your Chieftains, your M60s, your T-62s, that kind of thing. Lady Fortune was smiling upon the Chinese, however, because during the 1969 Sino-Soviet border conflict, where troops from both nations clashed on Zhenbao Island, Chinese troops managed to blow the track off of a Soviet T-62, which was then dumped into a river. And naturally, sensing a chance to get their hands on some of the Soviets' latest and shiniest tech, the PLA salvaged it and they started dissecting it. This reverse engineering windfall gave China a peek into more advanced tank technology and kickstarted a new phase in Chinese tank development. As a study on combat effectiveness of the CCP's ZTZ-99A tank, penned by Major Lin Chenyun of the Taiwanese Army, explains, over the next decades, China kept the ball rolling and imported or copied everything that it could, from British tank guns to American diesel engines, and then gradually moved from imitation to innovation. In short, China's tank tech went from woefully behind to almost catching up with the big boys by the turn of the century. Come the 1980s, those Chieftains, M60s and T-62s were being replaced by the Challenger 1, the M1 Abrams, and the T-80 respectively. As a result, China was starting to get really fidgety over getting its own advanced tank project finished. They put out the Type 69, basically a Type 59 with some T-62-ish bits grafted onto it, but that was about it. They hadn't even managed to close the gap with their rivals before it started widening even further, though. Fortunately, around this time, several new experimental designs did start to emerge. For example, there was the Type 79, a Type 69 with even more foreign tech crammed into it, as well as the Type 88. Tanks that, while very much built in the Soviet image, obviously, did see the Chinese start to incorporate more of their own ideas into its design, even if that left it with thin armor by global standards and a relatively underpowered engine. And then there was the Type 90 90 program. At a glance, it looked like yet another evolution of the same basic Soviet design line, specifically the T-62, but under the hood, it was something different, as the Type 90 was where China really started experimenting with trying their own ideas out. And while the Type 90 never entered large-scale service in China proper, although it did become Pakistan's Al-Khalid tank, the lessons learned from it fed directly into the tank that finally would, the subject of the video today, the Type 99. It was a clean sheet design that kept the proven parts of the Type 90, but wrapped them in a brand new turret, a modern composite armor package, and a digital fire control suite that supposedly put it squarely in the same league as the latest Western and Russian main battle tanks. Its development was handled by Norinco, a Chinese defense mega company that produces everything from police revolvers to missiles, and accelerated rapidly once the design passed its early trials. By 2001, the Type 99 had officially entered service, making it the PLA's first true third-generation main battle tank. They didn't sit on their hands after that either, as at the 2015 China Victory Day parade, they publicly unveiled the Type 99A, a significantly improved variant. From there, with it finally being properly finished, as it were, production ramped up through the 2010s to the extent that at the time of writing, the PLA is believed to have anywhere from 1,200 to 1,300 of the things, combining original and 99A variants. Now, this isn't a huge amount, all things considered, as the US, for example, has somewhere in the region of 4,500 Abrams, around half of which are in active service, and South Korea has around 1,500 third-gen K1s ready to go, before you even consider their 250 terrifying fourth-gen K2s. But it is still a very respectable number compared to most powers, and that, in a nutshell, is how China got there. So now, let's talk about the specs, shall we? Specifically, let's talk about the specs of the 99A. We're limited in time today, so we may as well focus on the main version. And let's start with the main event, the shooty bit. The 99A sports the ZPD-98 125mm smoothbore cannon, which is effectively China's fancied-up take on the old Soviet 2A46M gun, upgraded with tighter tolerances, linked to a fully digital fire control system. Like its Soviet ancestors, it uses an autoloader that feeds from a carousel under the turret floor, allowing the tank to operate with a 3-man crew and send 10 rounds downrange per minute. It's not wildly quick by today's standards, as the French Leclerc can squeeze out 12 or so in the same time, but it is toward the front of the pack and it is consistent. It also carries 22 rounds ready to go in the loader, with a total of 42 on board all in all. Ammunition-wise, the 99A's mainstay is the DTC-10 125 tungsten core armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds, a mouthful, and a long-rod penetrator round designed to punch through modern armor at a distance. Chinese sources regularly throw around figures like 850mm of normal armored steel plate penetration at 2 kilometers, and some even mention a depleted uranium variant, allegedly able to push that to 960mm. So on paper, that puts it in the same weight class as NATO's top-end M829A3A4 or DM63. Now, normally, we'd have to take their word for it, as China quite understandably keeps these details to itself. However, today isn't a normal day, because back in 2022, we got a little unexpected clarity on what these rounds might actually be capable of, thanks, rather bizarrely, to the game War Thunder. As part of the game's long-running tradition of players leaking classified documents to argue over vehicle stats, one very enthusiastic Chinese fan posted what it appeared to be a real technical breakdown of the DTC-10 125 round on the official game forums. The leak included angle-adjusted penetration tables that stated that the rounds could defeat roughly 220mm of armor plate at 71 degrees from 2 kilometers away, which, by our maths, roughly translates to 680 to 700mm of effective penetration. Not quite as juicy as the 900-plus claims from official sources, but still absolutely lethal, and most importantly, it confirmed that the Chinese aren't entirely making things up. Exaggerating? Yes, but not flatly chatting out of their backsides. For softer targets, the ZPT-98 also fires old-school high-explosive anti-tank and high-explosive fragmentation shells. These make it viable for clearing out bunkers, walls, infantry trenches, and generally making life miserable for anyone not in a metal box. And topping it all off is a gun-launched missile, a laser-guided round capable of hitting targets up to 5 kilometers away and chewing through 700mm of armor plate. The sources, even the Chinese language ones, are weirdly vague about exactly which one it is, but it stands to reason that it's likely a GP-125. All of this is backed up by a modern fire control system, full hunter-killer layout, panoramic sights, thermal imaging, ballistic computer, auto-tracking, and digital integration. You can argue over the exact specs, and you'd have to because Beijing hasn't told us exactly what they are, but functionally, the 99A is likely operating in the same tier as an Abrams M1A2 SEP V3 or a Leonard 2A7, which, if you don't know, is really rather high tier. And that's a pretty staggering leap when you remember that China was still mass-producing T-54 derivatives until shockingly recently. The turret's also covered in thick blocks explosive reactive armor, a type of add-on armor made of explosive-filled metal sandwiches that detonate outward when hit, disrupting incoming shaped charges or kinetic penetrators and reducing their ability to penetrate the tank's main armor. The front hull gets the same treatment too. The sides and rear, however, are not afforded such a luxury, and this does raise quite the question mark when considering crew survivability, particularly when one considers the autoloader. Take a decent hit there, and in all likeliness, the 99A doesn't just get taken out of the fight, it disappears, its turret flying somewhere far off to the horizon. To help avoid that scenario, the 99A, well, it brings a few party tricks. Laser warning receivers are standard, as are infrared smoke grenades. But the headline act is the tank's infamous Laser Dazzler, a roof-mounted countermeasure designed to blind enemy optics or fry missile seekers. Does it work? Against some systems, yeah, probably. Against all of them, no, probably not. We really can't say for certain until one of them falls into Western hands and gets pried open. What the 99A does lack, however, is an active protection system, a defensive system that detects and intercepts incoming threats like rockets or missiles before they hit the tank. Make no mistake, these are rare, period, with you having to look at things like 4th-gen South Korean K2s to find them as standard, and then specific subvariants of 3rd-gen tanks like the Israeli Merkava M4 and the German Leonard 2A7A1 to find them otherwise. So the fact that the 99A doesn't have it, not the end of the world, at least by global standards. It does look like the upcoming 99B is going to have one, however, specifically the GL6 hardkill system, as this year's photos have started sneaking out. So watch this space, we suppose? What the 99A does have, however, is go. Plenty of go, with its V12 diesel engine putting out 1500 horsepower at the crank. This, coupled with its relatively slim 55-ton weight, allows it to hit 80 km per hour on the road and 54 off it. For comparison, the German Leopard 2A7, powered by a 1500 horsepower diesel 2, tops out at around 70 kph on roads, while the American M1A2 Abrams hits a governed maximum speed in the high 60s, although apparently this can be squeezed up to the low 70s if you remove the limiter. In PLA service, the Type 99 in all its variants form the armoured fist of the Army's heavy combined arms brigades. We say heavy here quite literally too, as recently China reorganized its army into brigades that are categorized as heavy, medium, or light. Heavy brigades being ones that are fully mechanized and have a heavy concentration of tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, self-propelled howitzers, anti-tank missile vehicles, and tactical off-road vehicles, as opposed to the others, which may be more infantry heavy or more supporting role heavy. We doubt it'll come as a surprise to any of you to find out that those heavy brigades are also where you'll find the majority of the Type 99s, because they obviously need more tanks as a gross. What may come as a surprise, however, is the fact that such formations also appear to be considered more tactically vital, as while medium and light brigades can indeed have armored elements too, it is among them that you will typically find older models clinging on in there while they wait on their Type 99 replacement. And a slight asterisk on that too, because it also hinges on where the unit is based. For example, heavy brigades stationed in northern and central theater commands, call it Beijing-ish and Shenyang if you want a vague pin to stick on your map, will have far more Type 99s than units in other areas, because they have both the terrain and the infrastructure needed to fully facilitate proper modern armored combat. Look at the Southern Theater Command for comparison, covering Guangzhou, Hong Kong, Macau, that kind of area, where the terrain can oftentimes be just basically one big mountain, and instead you'll find the lighter Type 96s or Type 15s. It's also worth noting that the Type 99 has yet to see combat, so any discussion of its use should very much be considered provisional. But by looking at how they're used in exercises, we can at least get a pretty good idea of how the PLA is thinking. For For example, they're often seen operating in a combined arms fashion, working with mechanized infantry, artillery, drones, and air support in a network-centric way. This is a far cry from the PLA your granddad squared off with in the Korean War, which was more about human wave tactics and crossing battlefield obstacles by forming handily climbable piles of its own corpses. In fact, they even call this new way of doing things informationized warfare. Warfare where everyone and everything is all speaking to one another, receiving and processing high-level battlefield data in real time, and making intelligent decisions collectively based upon what it sees. If you think that sounds very similar to how NATO forces operate nowadays, you would be right to think so. The top brass in Beijing, they're not stupid. They saw Desert Storm, and they are seeing the ever-continuing cluster of their northern neighbors' invasion of Ukraine, and so they've been making notes. So what is all of that up to then, doctrinally, tactically, and practically? What have the Chinese actually learned from years of reform, drills, and watching foreign wars play out in real time? Well, if the exercises are anything to go by, the answer is that they've stopped thinking of the Type 99 as just a high-end tank and started treating it as a battlefield effect, a tool to be deployed with timing, coordination, and purpose. Not a brawler, not a bruiser, but a scalpel, embedded in a combined arms system, brought out at just the right moment to punch through break lines and decide fights. At places like the Zuri Combined Arms Training Base, for instance, Type 99s typically operate in platoons of 3, following behind ZBD-04A infantry carriers and UAV recon teams. The drones go in first, probing for ATGM nests, minefields, and enemy fortifications, with the infantry on hand to deal with any such threats that may be identified. Then, only once the threats are confirmed, do the tanks move, surging forward using bounding overwatch, with one element covering while the other advances, each bound about 600 to 800 meters at a time. Of course, this all sounds great, but as a great man once said, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, so, like we say, definitely consider all of this provisional. Alright, now that we've seen how the Type 99 fits into modern PLA doctrine and how it's used in carefully timed combined arms maneuvers rather than just being thrown into the front line, the obvious next question is, does it actually live up to all this hype? I mean, if you ask the Chinese, the answer is absolutely yes. Indeed, Mao Ming, the chief designer of the 99A, has described it as China's first information-based tank with integrated digital systems, battle management tools, thermal sights, and indigenous software that allows for real-time battlefield awareness and system self-diagnostics. In his words, it represents a clean break from China's past of imitation and the first time their tanks can properly speak to the rest of the force in a modern networked way. The PLA Daily echoes this sentiment, calling the tank the crown of the Chinese armored force and often referring to it as the pinnacle of Chinese land warfare capability. Chinese officers have publicly stated that it's not just a good tank, but it's one that can stand toe-to-toe with any in the world. And based on what we've seen, there's certainly some justification for that. The gun hits hard, the armor is no slouch, the sensors and mobility seem like they have the potential to be world-class. But we also know that Chinese sources cite penetration figures of up to 960mm of penetration from their top-end Sabot rounds, and then tell the troops the thing's something different, so perhaps we should take what they say with a pinch of salt. From the West, you get a more cautious take. Intelligence analyst Isaac Seitz, for example, believes that the Type 99A is a technical achievement, but it has caveats. His main concern, one echoed by many analysts actually, is survivability, specifically the autoloader. As we've already mentioned, all Type 99 models use the Soviet carousel-style autoloader layout, storing shells directly under the turret, and similar such systems have proven a tendency to go up big style when hit. So, Isaac's concerns certainly don't appear to be unfounded. But fundamentally, how do we know if it's any good, either way, when it's never been used in war? Well, we don't, really. And this is a matter that Dennis Blasco, a former US Army attaché in Beijing and author of The Chinese Army Today, put it, "The true test will only come when China's military is forced to prove itself in future conflict." And that's not a dig, it's just a fact. No Type 99 variant has seen real fighting. No one's put it up against an enemy using ATGMs, drones, or modern tanks in a dynamic battlefield, and so it would be unwise for us to assume. And if you really need convincing that assumptions only lead to making an ass of you and I, consider this. Remember, when every analyst from here to Moscow is getting sticky underpants over the D-14 Armata, Russia's new supposed wonder tank, only for it to not appear in Ukraine at all due to a plethora of issues that with 2020 hindsight were rather obvious, well, yeah. That said, however, the Chinese have actually put the Type 99 through to serial production, unlike the T-14, and in perfectly respectable numbers too, so perhaps some slack and a bit of benefit of the doubt should be extended their way when we make our provisional analysis. Or should it? Because in one 2018 drill, a unit equipped with shiny new Type 99As was beaten by less advanced forces using older tanks. And this comes from an article published by a Chinese state-controlled outlet, not a Western one. According to Chinese reporting, the issue, both times, wasn't the tank, it was the people in it. The crews didn't know how to use all of the new systems properly and fumbled the coordination. A very modern problem for a very modern tank. That's why experts like Dr. Richard Bitzinger, a visiting senior fellow with the Military Transformations Program out of Singapore, tried to hedge their bets. He's clear that China's latest armor is now in the same technological universe as the West's, which is a huge leap forward, but that whatever it delivers on the battlefield will come down to crew skill, doctrine, and training. There's also a symbolic side to all of this that we've yet to consider. The Type 99 is the pride of the PLA, and in many ways, the whole nation. It rolled out in every major exhibition, it was shown on recruiting posters, and hailed as the flagship of Chinese military innovation. The Global Times has gone as far as calling it the tank that shocked the West, and for China, newly pulled up to its seat at the big boys table, might give the Type 99 a different kind of value to them that we in the West just can't appreciate. So where's all that leave us? Well, the consensus, if you average it out, goes something like this. Technically solid, excellent even. Firepower, mobility, optics, all top-shelf stuff. Protection? Well, that's mixed. Good frontal armor, decent sensors, but let down by the autoloader and the current lack of APS. Operationality? Unproven. It might be amazing. It might be a paper tiger. We don't know. No one knows. Doctrinally? Impressive. The PLA seems to be using it smartly as part of a well-thought-out modern combined arms framework. But data from exercises encourages some potential tampering of expectations in this regard, at least for the immediate future. If you want a Western analogy, the 99A feels a bit like the early M1A2, not yet as refined as the SEPV3, but far beyond the M1s of the Gulf War. It's a tank with real promise, limited mostly by experience and institutional lag rather than engineering flaws. And if all of that sounds like a condemnation, it really isn't, because Don't Forget, as we speak, is rolling its way towards full serial production, and that just might be it. Thank you for watching.